Rome ain't the fourth beast, let me break it down. They push in false doctrine just to spin you round. Daniel had the vision, saw the beast arise, but Rome...
Shalom, shalom. All praises to the Most High in His only begotten Son. I'm Brother Josiah here with the Watchman 144, and today's study is called Rome is Not the Fourth Beast, Part 3, Daniel's 9 and the Roman Legions. Let's get straight to it. So let's get our first verse.
Daniel 9 verse 26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined.
So it's saying the people of this future leader will destroy the city and the sanctuary, right? So let's look up people in the Strong's Concordance. Let's get H5971. I'm reading from the Browns Drivers Briggs, and it says nation, people, nation, persons, members of one's people, compatriots, countryman, kinsman, kindred. So it says that the people, right? The members of one's people, the compatriots, the countryman of the prince that shall come. If we read Daniel's 9 and 26 in the ERV, it says, then the people of the future leader will destroy the city and the holy place, right? So the people who destroys the temple are the descendants of the Antichrist. That's what Daniel 9 is telling us. Whoever destroyed Jerusalem provides the ethnic origin of the future prince. It is the people, not the prince himself, who destroys Jerusalem. Were they Roman Italians? Were they Europeans? Let's go find out. So let's go get our first piece of proof in the book of Josephus.
Wars of the Jews, Book 3, Chapter 4, Section 2. But as to Titus, he sailed over from Achaia to Alexandria, and that sooner than the winter season did usually permit. So he took with him those forces he was sent for, and marching with great expedition, he came suddenly to Ptolemy, and there finding his father, together with the 2 legions, the 5th and the 10th, which were the most eminent legions of all, he joined them to that 15th legion which was with his father. 18 cohorts followed these legions. There came also 5 cohorts from Caesarea, with 1 troop of horsemen, and 5 other troops of horsemen from Syria. Now these 10 cohorts had severally 1,000 footmen, but the other 13 cohorts had no more than 600 footmen apiece, with 120 horsemen. There were also a considerable number of auxiliaries got together, that came from the kings Antiochus and Agrippa, and Sohemus, each of them contributing 1,000 footmen that were archers, and 1,000 horsemen. Malchus also, the king of Arabia, sent 1,000 horsemen, besides 5,000 footmen, the greatest part of which were archers, so that the whole army, including the auxiliaries sent by the kings, as well horsemen as footmen, when all were united together, amounted to 60,000, besides the servants, who, as they followed in vast numbers, so because they had been trained up in war with the rest, ought not to be distinguished from the fighting men, for as they were in their masters' service in times of peace, so did they undergo the like dangers with them in times of war, insomuch that they were inferior to none, either in skill or in strength, only they were subject to their masters.
So we just read from War of the Jews, Book 3, Chapter 4, Section 2. And Josephus speaks about the Roman legions that conquered Jerusalem in 70 AD. It speaks about the 5th, the 10th, and the 15th legion. So let's go see where these legions were from, right? So on the screen, we can see a list of the Roman legions. Josephus places the siege in the 2nd year of Vespucian, which corresponds to the year 70 of the Common Era. Titus began his siege a few days before Passover, surrounding the city with 3 legions. It says V Macedonia, so we can see it as number 12 on the list. So it says Moschia, and Moschia basically would be the Balkans today. This speaks about another legion. Legion is X11 Fulminata, and we can see X11 on this list under 22. So look on this list and it says 22 for Minita, right? And it says Cappadocia. Now, Cappadocia is Turkey, right? And the next Roman legion that it speaks about is XV Apollinaris. And we can see that on the list, number 25. XV Apollinaris, right? Which is also in Turkey. So let's get the last and fourth legion. And it says X Fretentis. So let's look up X on the list above. Fretentis, which is Syria, non-Italian. So these Roman legions that destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD were non-Italian Roman legions. These troops came from Turkey, Syria, and Macedonia, right? When people speak of history in the destruction of Jerusalem, they're picturing millions of Italians conquering and destroying Jerusalem. When according to Josephus, who was there when all this was going on, these troops were troops made of Middle Easterners. The cohorts that followed these troops also was from Syria and Caesarea, which is a place near Israel. So these are non-Italian cohorts. These cohorts were a part of the legions. They were small groups taken from the legions and created cohorts. So these cohorts were Syrian, Middle Eastern, and these Roman legions were mainly Middle Easterners. Josephus also speaks about the auxiliaries. Antiochus of Commagene. It says the last king of Commagene reigned between 38 and 72 as a client king to the Roman Empire. It says he sent forces commanded by his son Epiphanes to assist Prince Titus in the siege of Jerusalem. So this Antiochus the fourth of Commagene, I believe Commagene is a place in Turkey above Syria. They sent soldiers to support Titus. Commagene was not an Italian empire. Agrippa also sent soldiers, right? So that Agrippa was Herod Agrippa II. He was the last ruler from the Heronian dynasty, reigning over territories outside of Judea as a Roman client king, right? And supported the Roman side in the first Jewish-Roman war. Herod Agrippa was Heronian, and they were Edomites. So once again, we have non-Italian auxiliaries being sent to Jerusalem. So the next auxiliary is Ptolemais, right? He was a prince and a Roman client priest king from Syria. He sent soldiers to support the Romans as well. So these soldiers came from his area. And then it also says Malichus II was a ruler of Nebatea from 40 to 70 AD. Malichus cooperated in 66. A Jewish revolt occurred in Judea. Malichus sent 5,000 cavalry and 1,000 infantry to help Caesar Titus crush the rebellion. So these were the auxiliary, right? These people sent their soldiers to help the Romans. And these people were from what we call the Middle East. So these were non-Italian soldiers once again. The Roman legions were non-Italian, the cohorts were non-Italian, and the auxiliaries were non-Italian. They were not bloodline Romans. So let's get the next piece of proof.
Wars of the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 8, Section 1. Now Caesar took this wall there on the 5th day after he had taken the first, and when the Jews had fled from him, he entered into it with 1,000 armed men, and those of his choice troops, and this at a place where were the merchants of wool, the braziers, and the market for cloth, and where the narrow streets led obliquely to the wall. Wherefore, if Titus had either demolished a larger part of the wall immediately, or had come in, and, according to the law of war, had laid waste what was left, his victory would not, I suppose, have been mixed with any loss to himself. But now, out of the hope he had that he should make the Jews ashamed of their obstinacy, by not being willing, when he was able, to afflict them more than he needed to do, he did not widen the breach of the wall, in order to make a safer retreat upon occasion. For he did not think they would lay snares for him that did them such a kindness. When therefore he came in, he did not permit his soldiers to kill any of those they caught, nor to set fire to their houses neither. Nay, he gave leave to the seditious, if they had a mind, to fight without any harm to the people, and promised to restore the people's effects to them. For he was very desirous to preserve the city for his own sake, and the temple for the sake of the city. As to the people, he had them of a long time ready to comply with his proposals.
Titus, he ordered his soldiers to preserve the city and protect civilian lives. It kills the idea that Rome's leadership wanted to destroy Jerusalem. It proves that the actual destruction came from the wild and disobedient troops, right? The Arabian auxiliaries. We've showed through multiple studies that these Arabian people always had a perpetual hatred for these people, right? And they are now a part of this Roman army here to destroy Jerusalem, right? Now remember, Daniel 9:26 says the people of the prince would destroy Jerusalem, right? Not the prince himself, right? Strengthening the conclusion that Rome is not the fourth beast. Because we can see Titus right here say he wanted to preserve the city. He wanted to protect the civilians. But how can he be this fourth beast monster when he wanted to preserve it? Let's get another piece of proof out of Josephus.
Wars of the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 13, Section 4. Hereupon some of the deserters, having no other way, leaped down from the wall immediately, while others of them went out of the city with stones, as if they would fight them, but thereupon they fled away to the Romans. But here a worse fate accompanied these than what they had found within the city, and they met with a quicker despatch from the too great abundance they had among the Romans, than they could have done from the famine among the Jews. For when they came first to the Romans, they were puffed up by the famine, and swelled like men in a dropsy, after which they all on the sudden overfilled those bodies that were before empty, and so burst asunder, excepting such only as were skillful enough to restrain their appetites, and by degrees took in their food into bodies unaccustomed thereto. Yet did another plague seize upon those that were thus preserved, for there was found among the Syrian deserters a certain person who was caught gathering pieces of gold out of the excrements of the Jews' bellies, for the deserters used to swallow such pieces of gold, as we told you before, when they came out, and for these did the seditious search them all, for there was a great quantity of gold in the city, insomuch that as much was now sold in the Roman camp for 12 Attic drams as was sold before for 25. But when this contrivance was discovered in one instance, the fame of it filled their several camps, that the deserters came to them full of gold. So the multitude of the Arabians, with the Syrians, cut up those that came as supplicants, and searched their bellies. Nor does it seem to me that any misery befell the Jews that was more terrible than this, since in one night's time about 2,000 of these deserters were thus dissected.
So these Arabians had so much hatred for these people that they was cutting their bellies open looking for gold, and they said they killed over 2,000 people in one night. This atrocity was not ordered by Titus or any Roman general. The Arabians and Syrians committed these brutal actions. The destruction and cruelty were not the actions of Titus, but it was the uncontrolled savagery of the Middle Eastern troops that was a part of these Roman legions. Most of the soldiers at Jerusalem, they were not Latin Italians, but they were Middle Eastern. And these Arabians and Syrians are the same individuals that the Bible speaks of. Israel has always been in conflict with the Syrians and also the Arabians. Let's get another piece of proof from Josephus.
Wars of the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 13, Section 5. When Titus came to the knowledge of this wicked practice, he had like to have surrounded those that had been guilty of it with his horse, and have shot them dead, and he had done it, had not their number been so very great, and those that were liable to this punishment would have been manifold more than those whom they had slain. However, he called together the commanders of the auxiliary troops he had with him, as well as the commanders of the Roman legions, for some of his own soldiers had been also guilty herein, as he had been informed, and had great indignation against both sorts of them, and said to them, What, have any of my own soldiers done such things as this out of the uncertain hope of gain, without regarding their own weapons, which are made of silver and gold? Moreover, do the Arabians and Syrians now first of all begin to govern themselves as they please, and to indulge their appetites in a foreign war, and then, out of their barbarity in murdering men, and out of their hatred to the Jews, get it ascribed to the Romans, for this infamous practice was said to be spread among some of his own soldiers also. Titus then threatened that he would put such men to death.
We can clearly see right here, Josephus, which was actually there when this was taking place, he literally tells us that it was the hatred of the Roman soldiers that was committing all these acts and not the Romans. Why did Titus say, get it ascribed to the Romans? What was the point of Titus saying, oh, they doing all this barbarity and murdering men, and out of their hatred for the Jews, right? Because we know that the Arabians have a natural hatred for the Jews, and they were showing their hatred while wearing the Roman legion banner, right? The undisciplined behavior that was actually caused by Arabians and Syrians, not Romans, right? This shows clearly that the people destroying Jerusalem were wild Middle Eastern, acting on their own blood hatred. perfectly fulfilling Daniel's 9 and 26, right? Titus complained that the Arabians and Syrians committed this barbaric act, right, during the siege of Jerusalem. But because they were under Roman banners, the world would wrongly blame Rome for the atrocities, which the whole biblical scholar world does, says that Rome did all this, when really we can see Josephus and Titus attributing all these actions to the Arabians and Syrians, right, that were a part of the Roman legion. The Roman legion were non-Italians. Let's get our next piece of proof.
Wars of the Jews, Book 6, Chapter 4, Section 3. But then, on the next day, Titus commanded part of his army to quench the fire, and to make a road for the more easy marching up of the legions, while he himself gathered the commanders together. Of those there were assembled the 6 principal persons: Tiberius Alexander, the commander, under the general of the whole army, with Sextus Cerealis, the commander of the 5th legion, and Larsius Lepidus, the commander of the 10th legion, and Titus Phrygius, the commander of the 15th legion. There was also with them Eternius, the leader of the 2 legions that came from Alexandria, and Marcus Antonius Julianus, procurator of Judea. After these came together all the rest of the procurators and tribunes. Titus proposed to these that they should give him their advice what should be done about the holy house. Now some of these thought it would be the best way to act according to the rules of war, and demolish it, because the Jews would never leave off rebelling while that house was standing, at which house it was that they used to get all together. Others of them were of opinion, that in case the Jews would leave it, and none of them would lay their arms up in it, he might save it, but that in case they got upon it, and fought any more, he might burn it, because it must then be looked upon not as a holy house, but as a citadel, and that the impiety of burning it would then belong to those that forced this to be done, and not to them. But Titus said, that although the Jews should get upon that holy house, and fight us thence, yet ought we not to revenge ourselves on things that are inanimate, instead of the men themselves, and that he was not in any case for burning down so vast a work as that was, because this would be a mischief to the Romans themselves, as it would be an ornament to their government while it continued. So Fronto, and Alexander, and Cerealis grew bold upon that declaration, and agreed to the opinion of Titus.
But peep this, y'all. Titus rejects burning the temple. So Titus said we should not take our anger out on a building, something that's not alive, but we should take it out on the actual man, right? So what did Titus do after that? Titus orders that the temple should not be burned under any condition. Titus, with his full war council, officially ruled against burning the temple. This shows that the Roman leadership did not intend to destroy the temple, proving that the people who destroyed it were acting independently, right? These Arabians and Syrians, fulfilling Daniel's 9 and 26. The destruction was by the people of the prince. So when we look at what was being read, Titus did not want to destroy it, and they all agreed not to destroy the temple. Let's move forward. Let's get another piece of proof.
Wars of the Jews, Book 6, Chapter 4, Section 5. So Titus retired into the tower of Antonia, and resolved to storm the temple the next day, early in the morning, with his whole army, and to encamp round about the holy house. But as for that house, God had, for certain, long ago doomed it to the fire, and now that fatal day was come, according to the revolution of ages, it was the 10th day of the month Lous, AB, upon which it was formerly burnt by the king of Babylon, although these flames took their rise from the Jews themselves, and were occasioned by them. For upon Titus's retiring, the seditious lay still for a little while, and then attacked the Romans again, when those that guarded the holy house fought with those that quenched the fire that was burning the inner court of the temple. But these Romans put the Jews to flight, and proceeded as far as the holy house itself. At which time one of the soldiers, without staying for any orders, and without any concern or dread upon him at so great an undertaking, and being hurried on by a certain divine fury, snatched somewhat out of the materials that were on fire, and being lifted up by another soldier, he set fire to a golden window, through which there was a passage to the rooms that were round about the holy house, on the north side of it. As the flames went upward, the Jews made a great clamour, such as so mighty an affliction required, and ran together to prevent it, and now they spared not their lives any longer, nor suffered anything to restrain their force, since that holy house was perishing, for whose sake it was that they kept such a guard about it.
So Titus leaves for the night, going back to the Tower of Antonia, right? He plans to storm the temple the next morning. Now keep in mind, Titus had no plan to burn the temple that night. Matter of fact, he didn't want to burn the temple at all. While that night, But this is the crazy part about it. Titus had left, and the Jews started to fight the Romans again. Now, one of these Roman soldiers, once again, without Titus giving orders to them, right, burnt a window that was a part of the temple, right? Titus had no part in commanding the temple's destruction. We can clearly see that in the book of Josephus. The temple was lit on fire by the Roman soldier, not by Titus' order, right? And the hatred of these so-called non-Italian Roman soldiers. The Italians didn't have no beef with the Jews. When you look at who had beef with the Jews, it was the surrounding nations, which were the Syrians, Arabians, Herodians, all these Middle Eastern people. Let's get the next piece of proof.
Wars of the Jews, Book 6, Chapter 4, Section 6. And now a certain person came running to Titus, and told him of this fire, as he was resting himself in his tent after the last battle. Whereupon he rose up in great haste, and, as he ran to the holy house, in order to have a stop put to the fire. After him followed all his commanders, and after them followed the several legions, in great astonishment. So there was a great clamor and tumult raised, as was natural upon the disorderly motion of so great an army. Then did Caesar, both by calling to the soldiers that were fighting, with a loud voice, and by giving a signal to them with his right hand, order them to quench the fire. But they did not hear what he said, though he spake so loud, having their ears already dimmed by a greater noise another way. Nor did they attend to the signal he made with his hand neither, as still some of them were distracted with fighting, and others with passion. But as for the legions that came running thither, neither any persuasions nor any threatenings could restrain their violence, but each one's own passion was his commander at this time. And as they were crowding into the temple together, many of them were trampled on by one another, while a great number fell among the ruins of the cloisters, which were still hot and smoking, and were destroyed in the same miserable way with those whom they had conquered. And when they were come near the whole house, they made as if they did not so much as hear Caesar's orders to the contrary, but they encouraged those that were before them to set it on fire. As for the seditious, they were in too great distress already to afford their assistance, towards quenching the fire. They were everywhere slain, and everywhere beaten. And as for a great part of the people, they were weak and without arms, and had their throats cut wherever they were caught. Now round about the altar lay dead bodies heaped one upon another, as at the steps going up to it ran a great quantity of their blood, whither also the dead bodies that were slain above, on the altar, fell down.
How is the Roman Empire the fourth beast if Titus, which represented for the Romans, did not want to burn down the temple? His commanders and his whole legions followed him. Titus yells with a loud voice and signals with his hands to quench the fire, trying to stop it. But the soldiers are so consumed with fighting, anger, and chaos, they ignore his voice, ignore his hand signals. This shows that these people was not disciplined militarily, right? If the commander-in-chief tell you to stop, you're supposed to stop. But they didn't, right? The soldiers crowded and trampled each other, trying to get inside the temple. Many soldiers died in the crush and smoke. The soldiers encouraged each other to keep burning the temple. We can see that in the passage, right? And we can see here, Titus did everything in his power to stop the fire. But the lawlessness, anger, and the bloodlust of the soldiers, not by Roman order, caused the temple's destruction. We can clearly see this in Josephus, right? The fire spread it beyond anyone's control, fulfilling the destruction prophesied in Daniel 9:26, not by Roman official command, but by the wild passion of the people. Remember, the people of the prince shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the people of these Roman armies were Middle Eastern. They were not Italians. So let's get our last piece of proof.
Wars of the Jews, Book 6, Chapter 4, Section 7. And now, since Caesar was no way able to restrain the enthusiastic fury of the soldiers, and the fire proceeded on more and more, he went into the holy place of the temple, with his commanders, and saw it, with what was in it, which he found to be far superior to what the relations of foreigners contained, and not inferior to what we ourselves boasted of and believed about it. But as the flame had not as yet reached to its inward parts, but was still consuming the rooms that were about the holy house, and Titus supposing what the fact was, that the house itself might yet he saved, he came in haste and endeavored to persuade the soldiers to quench the fire, and gave order to Liberalius the centurion, and one of those spearmen that were about him, to beat the soldiers that were refractory with their staves, and to restrain them. Yet were their passions too hard for the regards they had for Caesar, and the dread they had of him who forbade them, as was their hatred of the Jews, and a certain vehement inclination to fight them, too hard for them also. Moreover, the hope of plunder induced many to go on, as having this opinion, that all the places within were full of money, and as seeing that all round about it was made of gold. And besides, one of those that went into the place prevented Caesar, when he ran so hastily out to restrain the soldiers, and threw the fire upon the hinges of the gate, in the dark, whereby the flame burst out from within the holy house itself immediately, when the commanders retired, and Caesar with them, and when nobody any longer forbade those that were without to set fire to it. And thus was the holy house burnt down, without Caesar's approbation.
Why would Titus try to save the temple? Titus ordered not to burn the temple, and his soldiers disobeyed him, acting out of hatred and greed. The destruction fulfilled prophecy without Titus' approval. So that means Rome didn't approve of the temple being burnt, right? The people who destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD were Arabians, Syrians, Cappadocians, non-Roman Italians, right? Not only were there auxiliaries, Arabs and Syrians, but even the official Roman legions stationed in the east were of Middle Eastern bloodlines. It were not millions of Romans in Jerusalem during this time. It was the auxiliary soldiers and Roman legions in that area, right? Thus, the people who destroyed the temple in 70 AD fulfilled Daniel's prophecy perfectly. Titus tried to save the temple, not destroy it. Therefore, Rome cannot be the fourth beast of Daniel's prophecy. The future prophecy, the Antichrist, cannot be Titus at all. The Antichrist will rise from Middle Eastern peoples, fulfilling both history and prophecy perfectly. The future prince, Antichrist, will rise from the descendants of Arabians, Syrians, or Cappadocians. He will not be a Roman or European. He will be Middle Eastern. The fourth beast will be a Middle Eastern empire, not a European Roman revival. Rome is not the fourth beast of Daniel's vision. I'm Brother Josiah here with the Watchman 144, and we just completed the study. Rome is not the fourth beast, part 3. Daniel's 9 in the Roman legions. Showed you guys that the Roman legions of 70 AD were not Italian. They were mostly Middle Eastern. Right? I hope you guys were educated. I hope you guys got something, got a jewel up out of this or whatnot. And I hope to see y'all on the next one. Peace.